Hello, I'm Jack Grady, and on behalf of the Archives and History Committee of the First Baptist Church on the Square in LaGrange, Georgia, we welcome Vietnam veteran Pat Bowie, and we thank him for his service to our country and to our church. Pat, we do appreciate you coming and participating in this Veterans Project, and look forward to hearing a little bit about your experience in military service.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jack. I appreciate being a part of this.
You served during the Vietnam period.
Yes, I did.
I had a brother who was a part of that as well. Matter of fact, he was a career soldier and was in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. He was on General Westmoreland's staff. Yeah. But, well, we're here to talk about you and your experience. So, tell us a little bit about your enlistment process. Were you drafted or did you volunteer?
And when I was at Georgia Tech, I actually was in ROTC.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And after my sophomore year, when it was a decision you could stay in ROTC and then, go into the service, I decided to do that. I thought, that was a very good idea to serve my country, and which I did.
Yes.
At the end of ROTC at Georgia Tech, I graduated in 1963, and that's when I was commissioned.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But I got a deferment to go to graduate school at Clemson University and get a PhD in math. So I had a 5-year deferment. So I'd actually been in the Army 5 years, technically, when I actually went in active duty. So in 1968, I was sent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and field artillery, which was a real experience. And at that time, Vietnam was going on, and so our officer basic training was basically called Vietnamization. And that was my first real experience of active duty in the Army.
Yes.
It took us, I guess we were there about 3.5 months.
Fort Sill.
Fort Sill. And, learned to be a forward observer, an air observer. We mainly were trained on 105 and 155 guns, and it was, again, for someone who was now 27 years old, it was quite an experience to go through training with. Most of my class they were just out of college. They're 22, 21 years old, and here I was, 27 years old. Had 2 children at the time, and Sandra, I was married to Sandra then as well.
But you were a commissioned officer.
I was commissioned when I came out of Georgia Tech in ROTC.
Yes.
And interesting, after 5 years, I actually had 5 years time.
Yes.
And so I went in as a first lieutenant.
First lieutenant.
Rather than a second lieutenant, which was nice, but at Fort Sill, they didn't really make too much difference between your age or your rank at that time.
I see. Okay. Well, what happened after that period of time?
I graduated. I'll brag a little bit. I was second in my class of 103 people, and
wonderful.
And with my background, PhD, older children, myself and just one other person was sent to Washington D.C. I wouldn't say we were lucky, but I would say that fate had it that the rest of my class went to Vietnam right away.
Wow.
And I was at the Pentagon, assigned to Deputy Chief of Staff of Personnel. And my first responsibility was running a data processing operation, for that group.
Did you ever run across there at the Pentagon a colonel by the name of Grady?
I did not. Was that
my brother?
Was that your brother? Was he there at that time?
Well, I think by that time he was probably in Vietnam.
Yeah.
But, he was at the Pentagon in the planning phase before the war.
Yeah.
And when he got to Vietnam, he was frustrated because they couldn't apply the things that they had planned, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Because of the nature of that war. And,
yeah, and also the politics of the war.
Well, that's it. That's it.
Yeah, one of the things I saw being at the Pentagon, you began to see that there were some politics being played.
Yes.
In terms of de-escalating, escalating Vietnam. Sure. It was very interesting.
He had very little to say about his Vietnam experience afterward. He just didn't like to talk about it.
I bet that's true. I bet that's true.
You know, I accepted that. we talked about World War II. I mean, and not Vietnam, but Korean War.
Yeah. After I was at the Pentagon for almost a year, and then there was a situation that they said every single person in field artillery would have to go overseas. And so, you know, would be assigned overseas. So I got orders to go overseas. At first, I thought I was going to Vietnam, but again, what they did, they sent me to Thailand, to an army depot, which was the supply chain for, at that time, 7 Air Force bases in Thailand. And so right before I left, I had my third child. Sandra and I did. And so here I am, 3 kids, moved them back down to South Carolina, and I went to...
Off you went to Thailand.
Off I went to Thailand. And my first experience in Thailand, again, it was probably because of my age, my background. I land there, I go into the personnel officer, major, and he said, we have a special project we want you to take before you get your regular assignment. I said, okay, you know, what is it? And it turns out that at that time, Commanding General of Vietnam, General Creighton Abrams, was having gallbladder removal. And we had a compound close by where I was stationed, and they wanted me to be there, fix the compound up, prepare for his surgery. He was going to have it in Bangkok and come down to this compound to recuperate. So basically I was his aide for almost 10 weeks.
Well, and doing much of his job.
Oh, it was great.
I mean, bet it was interesting.
The guy was an amazing, you know, very gruff looking when you first met him. Smoked cigars.
Did he?
But interestingly, he loved classical music.
Wow.
So we even had, you know, a player for him. We found out what kind of music, you know, he was playing, and he had the old-fashioned, you know, music cassettes, and so we had a player there for him. We fixed up this whole compound. His family also was living in Bangkok. They came down with him, and I think his son now maybe is still in the service.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm fairly sure that he was, unless he's retired. And so, you know, we played horseshoes. We taught him to water ski. He'd never water skied before in his life, but turned out to be just a wonderful guy. Just a really neat person.
I'll bet.
But anyway, that was one of my success stories of you know, being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, boy.
For sure.
Was a fascinating experience.
It was, and he was quite a person. I know he's passed away now, but really a neat guy.
He was in World War II as well.
He was.
I'm reading a book right now, Pat, about the Battle of the Bulge. My brother-in-law was killed in the Battle of the Bulge. In 1944, Christmas time. And that was a horrible experience.
That war was...
But along in that book, there are a lot of names, and I think Creighton Abrams' name was in there.
Yeah, don't doubt it at all. Yeah. Really nice person.
This book, by the way, was written by General Eisenhower's son.
Huh, really?
John Eisenhower.
Yeah, yeah.
It's called The Bitter Woods, the Battle of the Bulls. The Bitter Woods. It was cold. It was cold.
Oh, I've seen, you see movies of those
Yeah.
kind of things, but you can't appreciate it.
Yeah.
Even see the suffering and everything that was happening in the movies. It's still, you can't comprehend it. You just cannot comprehend it.
Just unbelievable, some of the things.
Yeah.
Well, back to your...
Yeah, and so when I finished that 10 weeks, then I became, again, as God would have it, I became the aide to the commanding officer of the depot.
Mm-hmm.
And
in Thailand.
In Thailand, it's in Satahip was where it is. It's in the southeastern part of Thailand, and the largest Air Force base was right across a little waterway called Utapao Air Force Base.
Oh.
And the one thing that I would say about having that experience working for him, and I mean, I was dealing with everything from, supply chain, procurement, also dealing with even reviewing judicial matters for him and giving him recommendations. So all of a sudden, I went from being a physics degree at Georgia Tech and a PhD in theoretical math to I was dealing in business. And it basically changed, my direction.
Really?
After I got out of the service, I enjoyed it.
Sure.
Working with people.
Yes.
There were problems you had to solve all the time.
Yes.
And it was extremely educational, and like I say, it did change the direction that I wanted to go in. So had a real impact on my life.
Oh, good. I appreciate you sharing that. That's...
Yeah.
And then, how long were you in Thailand?
I was there a little shy of a year, and during my time there, I knew I was going to be coming back to the U.S., and when I came back, I would be leaving the service.
Yes.
And so, then I became, again, I had 3 kids and Sandra in the U.S., and I had to begin to worry about, what's my next job going to be? So I contacted Clemson University and said, could I come back and teach? Mm-hmm. And they said, sure.
Oh, good.
So when I came back in country and left the service,
had a job waiting.
Then I had a job waiting teaching mathematics at Clemson. So I taught there for a year. During that period of time, I was, looking for what did I really, who did I want to work for? And now that I had this new direction, and again, interesting story. God provided the answer as well. I basically interviewed quite a number of people, and during that year. And it was one of those times where you kept looking and looking, and no doors opened up, and you say, why aren't any doors opening up? And I can recall one night, in my prayer time, I just said, God, where do you want me to be? Do you want me to stay here, or I'm open.
Sure. Yeah,
it was one of those times you just sort of give up yourself and you say, okay, what's your will?
Right.
And believe it or not, the next day I was going on an interview.
The next day.
And I went to this interview in Greenville, South Carolina, from Clemson, and it didn't turn out well. I just didn't like the interview, and so I was driving back to Clemson through Greenville, main road, and I saw an IBM sign, and there was a gentleman that I went through graduate school with that worked for IBM. So I said, hey, I'll just pull over and say hello to this guy named Bob. And Sandra would tell you that's not like me. I don't spur of the moment visit people. It's just not me. And so, but I did, and he wasn't there. So I told the secretary there, I said, just tell him Pat Bowie came by. Just say hello. Nothing important. So I went on to Clemson that night. He called me.
Oh.
And, you know, we just catching up, chatting, and we hadn't seen each other in a while. And he said, what in the world were you doing in Greenville? And I said, well, I was looking, you know, I've been looking for a job, trying to determine who I was going to work for. And he said, well, I know exactly who you need to work for. And he said, you need to go to work for Milliken and Company in Spartanburg. He said, I am their IBM rep.
Oh,
so,
how about that? Hey,
so,
boy.
So he said, are you interested? I said, sure.
Yeah.
You know, so next day he called me, said, can you come tomorrow and interview? I went and interviewed, loved it, loved the people, loved the opportunity, and so I accepted the job on the spot.
Yeah,
absolutely
wonderful.
on the spot.
And then how long
But it's amazing what God can do if you just turn your life over to Him.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that. That's a great story. It is. And then how long was it from there before you came to LaGrange?
I was working for a department there at Milliken that was a problem-solving department. And I was working for the industrial division, and there are actually some plants here in LaGrange in that division. Keck's plant was one of the businesses.
I see.
And so they sent me down here. I still lived in Spartanburg, but they sent me down here to work on a project. And so I worked on this project, and it was a developing of a product. Finished the project. It was a successful project, and I presented that to Roger Milliken one day. He wanted to, you know, and it was a computer program that did all kinds of fancy things, and he loved it, you know, and we played around with it and showed him how it worked. And then one day we were in a manager's meeting, about 100 people there, and I'm sitting in the back, and he calls my name, and I say, you know, I was halfway paying attention, and I heard my name. He said, come up here. So I had to go up front. He said, come up here, and I want you to tell them about this project you worked on for Keck's down in LaGrange, Georgia. So I presented it, and Tom Malone, who was then over the floor covering division here in LaGrange, he was in the audience, and he basically saw the presentation. And I think it was within the next day or two, he calls me up and he says, I want you to come work down here in my division.
How about that?
So I was only in Spartanburg about 8 months, and came to work here for, you know, for the floor covering division.
And about what year was that?
That would have been 1971.
Okay, 71.
Right, and but we, you know, at that time, a lot of people may remember this, there were not a lot of spec homes built here. It was very hard to find a place to live here. And so I was commuting back and forth with another gentleman who was working here and had the same problem as I did. And finally, we moved in, Sandra and I and 3 kids moved into an apartment here in LaGrange and sold our house in Spartanburg. And that was early 1972. So, yeah. So we've been here ever since.
Well, over 40 years.
Well, I think, about what, 42 years?
Something
going on 42 years.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
Something like
over
that.
40 years. Yeah, that's great. Well, we're glad you're here.
Hey, it's been a blessing. We joined this church, First Baptist, in 1972 when we got here.
Right away.
I love the people here. People are, you know, extremely welcoming.
Yes.
And you know, we
Been
still
here ever since.
we still love the people here. Yeah.
Very, very active. Your family.
Yes.
That's great. That's great. Well, it's quite a story. Success story from day one.
Yeah, well, you know, it's successful only because of God. You know, we give credit to God for how He's blessed us in many ways.
You're to be commended for making that comment and for living it out as you have.
Well, I appreciate
that. Thank you so much for coming and
thank you.
telling us about your unusual and interesting Vietnam experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah.
And educational.
Yeah, I'm
was
sure
very
it was.
educational
Well,
for me.
Anything else you'd like to share?
No, other than, again, I appreciate what you're doing. It's been a well worth. I'm sure you've enjoyed every minute
yes.
of it.
Oh,
I
yes,
can
it has.
imagine all the stories.
So
would have
many
been,
different things. Yeah.
It's a shame that maybe you couldn't take all of that and make some kind of 2-hour movie out
Wow.
of it. It would be unbelievable. But a lot of men, suffered and died. And,
Oh, yes,
and
sure.
that's what makes you thankful,
Yes.
for the experience that we've had.
Right.
I wish sometimes that our young people appreciated what many of these people had sacrificed.
Right.
And
Yes. They just don't know.
it gives us our freedom today.
Particularly.
Yeah.
Well, Pat, thank you. I
Hey,
appreciate it.
thank you so much,
Yes,
Jack.
sir.
I appreciate you.
Bless you. I will say God.